sitting in the box of my truck on my quad. Got about maybe an hour and a half to kill. I'm trying to sneak into this area in a bit. It's actually one of my favorite deer hunting spots in the fall, and I left some cameras in there. So I had to go check them. Sure enough, there's a nice bull elk has been running around in there non-stop, including last night. So we're going to go and give him a try. Probably about an hour before it gets dark. I got a few hours yet. What else? Sarah's flying home on Saturday. I think it's Thursday today. I'm going to stay and lug 100 pounds of salt up into the woods to make a salt lick for next year. Leave some trail cameras around, and I blew the back window out of my truck today with my quad winch hook. I screwed up. I pulled the winch cable in. It's good enough, and I threw the hook and hooked it up over the rack of the front of the quad, and it was hitting loose. And then I hit a little drainage ditch when I wasn't looking, and boom! Swung into the window, blew the back window out. That sucks. That sucks. I have to try to get that fixed somehow, ASAP, in the next town over. That's all my immediate new news. Now, who do we have waiting to be heard? I don't know how long. We're going to get into it. Listen to this. Steve, it's Mike again. Sorry for another email, but I want to add one final thought for everyone to know. The female Bigfoot changed me. She was beautiful. The emotion she gave us that morning a month ago changed me. All the ugly people that say we're liars, crazy, or say, quote, kill one for science, end quote, assholes, all of them. Don't allow anyone to tell you that you're crazy for seeing one or saying you've seen one. Believe we, the few that have seen them, are the true lucky ones. Yes, they scare the hell out of us. However, there are a few that can tell somehow we're safe. Your channel is a godsend. You're doing what is needed, and has empowered me to listen a little more to those I know have had encounters. Had to say that, Mike. All right. There's the shitty deal about getting a second email without all of them in one, right? About some time I do a little digging and find email number 1. But there's some words of encouragement from another member of the club, right? This next one is titled, My Son, a Sasquatch. Hi, Steve. I hope this email finds you and yours in good health. Here's my story in 2 parts. It's 2 parts because I finally put 2 and 2 together. A little on my background. I grew up hunting and trapping with my father, so I learned very young about being in the woods. I spent most of my life hunting, trapping, and fishing, minus my time in the military. It was 28 years ago in early August. My four-year-old son and I went scouting game trails, and I was teaching him to track. We'd been out most of the day with the incident when, sometime early afternoon, I caught a whiff of something very foul smelling. I at first thought it was a stank-ass bear, so I kept my boy very close to me. This went on for about an hour, where I would smell it and then not. I got this strange feeling when every hair on my body went rigid. I caught movement on my left side and stopped and watched, frozen by choice, watching intently as the mass about 100 yards away in the thick firs. It didn't move. It would only move when we did. I normally never went in the woods without a weapon while scouting. All I had was my custom-made Bowie knife with a 12-inch blade. We started back to the house, and then this thought came into my mind that said, give me the child. My blood went ice cold, and I thought back to whatever the hell this was over my dead body MFer. I think I read this one. Why are these emails not marked as read? I'm a formidable man at 6'2", 265, and solid. I knew all I had was my knife, but it was going to be what it is if that whatever it was came after my son. There was a huge sugar pine blowdown, and I sent my son to the very top of it. I went up about 10 feet for a better look at my surroundings and vantage points for defense or attack. I remember thinking, come and get it, asshole. We stayed there for roughly half an hour, then slowly made our way back to the house. I caught glimpses of something, which I shrugged off as a hungry bear stalking us because of my son. We made it back to the homestead, and I never said anything to my wife about what had taken place, and I never mentioned it to my son again after that day. That's really odd, right? To me, that's very odd. Not just with this individual, but with everybody. Fast forward 6 months. It was about 8 p.m., and I went out to start the generator. We've been homesteading 2 years now on the backside of 40 acres in Garland, Maine, without incident. I'd cleared an acre behind the house to the woodline for the solar array that I was going to purchase in the spring. And there was a 4-inch crust on top of a 2-foot snowpack. And even at my size, I could run across it without breaking through. I lifted the cover on the generator and choked it. I gave it a pull. I heard a crunch in the tree line 60 or 70 yards to my right. There was some moonlight, just enough so that you could make out basic stuff. I looked for a couple of minutes, and I blew it off as a moose or a big deer. I leaned over to pull the generator cord again, and I heard a crunch. This was no moose or deer or any animal that I could figure. I looked again at the tree line to my right, but I couldn't make anything out. On guard now, I went to lean forward, and I heard the crunch, and looked up and seen this massive figure coming right at me. I was 10 yards from the door, and I hauled ass. I cleared 4 steps, and there was a thin layer of ice on the porch, and as I threw the storm door open, my right leg went under it, raking up the entire shin. I remember turning as I grabbed the doorknob and looking over my left shoulder, and our eyes locked. It was only a brief second, but I remember it like it was yesterday. From the rafter tails on the house, it was 9 feet from the ground. He was massive. The top of his shoulder was level with the rafter tails. My guess is he was easily 10 feet tall. And if I had to guess, he was in the neighborhood of 800 to 900 pounds. As I clawed my way into the house, my fear immediately turned to anger. I looked up at my wife and kids, and she had a look on her face like I had lost my mind. I definitely felt he was a threat, and I thought to myself, I'm going to kill you. I grabbed the 30-06, leaning near the door, racking the bolt, and driving one to the chamber. Having no fear for my own safety, I went back to my time in combat, and I knew what had to be done. Out the door I went with every intention of eliminating this threat. But there was nothing. I scouted the perimeter, and nothing. I went inside. My wife asked me what the hell was going on, and I explained to her what I'd seen and what had happened. She thought it was just a bear. But bears aren't that big here, and they were in hibernation. The next morning, I took her and the kids outside at the back of the house, and where this thing I know now was Sasquatch had come from. The strides he made were massive. Easily 9 feet, and he covered 60 or 70 yards in the time it took me to cover 10. Massive and extremely agile. After that, I took the kids to the bus stop, armed to the teeth. 50 cal handgun on my side and a 30-06. I rented a house in Bangor, Maine, and got my family the hell out of there. It was about a year later when I was sitting in a stand hunting. I had remembered the time I smelled that foul smell, and the words put into my thoughts gave me the oh, sorry, there's a little missing quotations. And the words put into my head, thoughts, give me the child, came back. To this day, I still believe the two encounters were the same being. I know and believe full well they are no effing ape, despite what the mainstream asswipe Sasquatch so-called experts say. They are far more advanced than we are in thought, strength, speed, and ability to move through time without being noticed. There were no tracks leading away from the house, just the ones when he came for me. I never shared this story with anyone but my mother, and she agreed that they were out there. I honestly don't give a shit if anyone believes me. I know what happened and what I saw. Sorry this is so long, Steve. I tried to get as much of the story in there as I could. I know you get thousands of emails. If this makes it to the channel, great. If it doesn't, at least I got it off my chest. Feel free to use my name, Steve. I love the hunt stories. Keep them coming. Sincerely, Carl Weeks. Carl, appreciate that. Your honesty, man. And I don't think I read this. I think the one I read was a guy in a tent with a knife and his son. Possibly. Whatever. That is frickin' scary. Yeah, imagine somebody waking up in the morning and thinking, gee, I wonder what I'm gonna make up today. And send to that guy on YouTube in an email, because I got nothing but time and imagination. Right? Yeah. Let's keep the voices rolling. Moved just like that. No doubt. Thank you for bringing closure to me is the title of this next email. Steve, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for what you do and bringing some closure for me. I'm 66 years old and I live in upstate New York. Late summer of 2020, because of the moronic government lockdowns, I started watching online videos. That is how I came across your channel. Honestly, at first I didn't care much about the emails you read. I enjoyed the scenery. Then you read a story about a man who had a Sasquatch/Bigfoot encounter in the Adirondack Mountains. I must have listened to that story 5 or 6 times. I had the biggest holy shit moment of my life. I remember an incident I had when I was a kid. Growing up as a kid, my parents had a small camping trailer. We spent many summer weekends camping in the Adirondack Mountains. When I was 11 or 12, my parents heard about a new campground opening at Pine Lake, New York. They decided to park our trailer there for the summer season. This new campground was on the remote side of the lake. The first year the campground was open, there was just one dirt road in and out. There were approximately 20 campsites. On weekends, 4 to 5 of the campsites had people on them. Weekdays, there was nobody there. Except for the lake being on the east side, the campground was surrounded by miles of forest. My aunt, uncle, and my 5 cousins from the New York City area were coming to spend a long weekend with us. My dad borrowed a large tent and 7 to 8 cots. My family went up on a Thursday, the day before my relatives showed up. My dad and I set up the tent. I convinced him to sleep in the tent with me. Of course, I had to sleep on the cot right next to the door flap. My mom and sister slept in the camper. And in the middle of the night, I woke up because 2 animals were fighting. It sounded like they were screaming at each other. It went on for about 30 seconds. Once they stopped, I asked my dad, what was that? He said it was raccoons fighting over the garbage. After that, I could not fall asleep. I heard my dad breathing heavily, so I knew he was asleep, and then I heard twigs breaking behind the tent, like someone was walking towards the tent. Once it got to the back of the tent, it walked up the side of the tent. Brushing against it. The whole side of the tent was moving, along with part of the top. The screen flap was all the way down. The bottom third of the solid flap was open to let the air in. Laying on my cot, I could see out the front of the tent about 2 feet. When this thing got to the front of the tent, I could hear it walking across the front. I stared at the front to see what it was. And I saw a foot. A human foot. I screamed and ran to the back of the tent. My dad woke up. I told someone was walking around the tent. I saw a foot. He smiled and said someone's walking around the tent in bare feet in the middle of the night. He laughed and said it was a bear. I grabbed my sleeping bag and I slept on the cot farthest away from the front. The next morning I heard my dad calling my name and telling me to come out. And there down the road, about 40 yards, was a black bear walking away from us. My dad looked at me and said, "See, I told you it was a bear last night." I told him again, I saw a foot. And he just laughed. Whenever we went camping, one of our favorite things to do is just before dusk to do the local garbage dump. Go to the local garbage dump and watch the bears come in to feed. A few times I had a bear walk right by me. At 11 or 12, I knew what a bear's paw looked like. What I saw was a foot. But why would someone be walking around in their bare feet? This made no sense to me. At 11 or 12, I had never even heard of a Sasquatch or Bigfoot. When I got older, I did hear a Sasquatch, but in my mind, that was just a myth in the Northwest. Come on, an unknown ape walking around in the woods. But because, but because of you and your channel, I finally have closure on what really happened that night when I was a kid. And this is where my story gets effed up. Our family dog is a 110-pound German Shepherd Lab mix. I walk him every night. And it was less than 2 weeks after my holy shit moment that I decided to walk my dog through an isolated neighborhood across a highway from mine. This neighborhood is shaped like a horseshoe and is surrounded by woods. There is a heavily wooded deep ravine that runs through the middle of it. The first 80 yards of each entrance, there are no houses, just woods on one side and the ravine on the other. We start walking up the one entrance right next to the ravine. We walked up about 10 yards, and my dog stopped to piss, and immediately I was overcome with fear. Fear like I have never experienced. My gut was telling me something was in the ravine that did not belong there. I was frozen with fear. My dog finished and started to drag me. We continued our walk, and I was so scared. Just before we got to the first houses, I heard a branch break, and it was not a twig, it was a branch. I stopped dead in my tracks and just stared in the ravine and could not move. And again, my dog started to drag me. Once we got to the houses, the fear went away. When we left this neighborhood and walked by the ravine, I was so overcome with fear again. And it was my turn. I was dragging the dog to get the hell out of there. The two things I cannot stop thinking about are, why didn't my dog have any reaction? Or did he, and that is why it dragged me? Second, these beings was their way to let me know that they know that I know about them. That's effed up, huh? Again, thank you so much for bringing closure to what happened to me as a kid. I just wish my dog was still alive to hear your videos. Be safe, Rob K. Appreciate you, Rob. I wonder how your knowledge base has come along since then, due to listening to all the people here. Yeah, nobody wants to see a foot outside the tent flap at night. Oh, these little bugs will get me. Including me. This next... Oh my god, how is this bug still on me? Getting right against my eyeball. Alright. I think I got him there. Alright, this next one is titled Promised Encounters. Excuse me. Hey, Steve. It's Pat again. A couple weeks ago, I sent you my thoughts on facts versus conclusions, and I mentioned that I had a number of encounters to relate. So here it goes. At the outset, let me say that I've always had an open mind with regards to the possible existence of these beings. Now I have no doubt whatsoever. The encounters involved my 30-year-old daughter, her 40-plus-year-old friend, and to a lesser degree, myself. My daughter and her friend are intelligent, educated women who successfully run their own businesses. I would trust either of them to make life or death decisions for me if I couldn't. We live in Maine. The first encounter took place in an area where previous sightings have been reported. They're driving in a somewhat rural but not remote area. There are farms, orchards, and wooded areas in most locations. You can see your neighbor's house from yours. They're looking for a specific address when my daughter realized that her GPS wasn't working as it should. She pulled into a driveway to get her bearings when a huge, hair-covered creature walking on two legs came out of a tree line, crossed the yard, and went into another tree line. This is on a February day in broad daylight. She backed out of the driveway and headed down the road, and neither one spoke for several minutes. And finally, her friend asked, "Did you see it?" She replied, "Yes, it wasn't a bear, and I don't want to talk about it." She eventually, albeit reluctantly, told me weeks later. One of your videos had an email that suggested that encounters like this result in people being tagged and subject to further contact with these beings. I now believe this to be the case, given the series of events these women have experienced over the last few years. This will be related in future emails. It seems that once they know that you know, they aren't shy about showing up on a regular basis. Regarding the creature, the only description they gave was very tall, massive, cleared the yard in a few steps, towered over the clothesline, and if it had been near the vehicle, an SUV, its knee would have touched the side view mirror. More to come, Pat. Okay, that sounds familiar too. What am I doing here? Now, I wonder, Pat, if you have emailed us back. I wonder. I hope. I got a whole bunch that aren't marked as red in here. Okay, just because I know you are wondering is a title of this email. Okay, so what did it look like? It was huge, 8 foot plus tall. Wide, really wide. The hair, and yes, it was hair, was completely covering its body and was reddish with a lot of gray mixed in. Its shoulders were way wide, wider than the average doorway by at least double. Its face had a beard and was the color of a very well-tanned Native American or South American indigenous person, golden red/brown. Its mouth was huge, wide as hell. It was grinning and its teeth looked like blocks. It looked for all the world as proportionally as wide as those stupid wind-up monkeys that play the cymbals. Its nose was like that of John Allen Amos and the guy from Good Times, a TV show that played James Evans. That was the immediate impression I got, and seeing photos of the dude, that's exactly what his nose looked like. The thing had a thick brow ridge and a slight coned head. There seemed to be dark circles around his eyes, and they looked to be solid black like a shark. I looked at it, looked away, looked at it again to be sure I wasn't tripping, and then a third time, and yep, it was real and it was there. I put my head down in an effort to process what the F I'd just seen, then looked up again and it was gone. I went back to camp and the rest is in the first email. Thanks, Ash. There you go. Where's the first email? And there's a description. I'm going to keep going. Marked as read. Not seeing is believing. It's the title of this email. I'm a hunter and worked for the veteran PMEL and worked for the FAA in a few places around the country. Conus and Alaska. Until I retired, I never had any experiences with these creatures. I, with my son, accidentally walked into brown bears hunting area on Douglas Island. Never seen it, but there was a large fresh pile of asphalt steaming in an upper muskeg field. We looked around and saw nothing in the rainforest. I had a 454 Castle and an odd 6. My son had a 357 and a 30-30. I knew they were too small, and I told my son, we'll head back down the mountain. I told my son to go down the hill as I watched and stood guard until he could have my back. Then I walked slowly towards him as he guarded. As I came up to him, we heard a loud roar from the bear. We never seen it. That was a bear, though. We continued that way down the hill until we got to the van and left. Now our first strange encounter. We moved to Colorado, western slope. Again, I worked high sites all over the Rockies here and some in Wyoming. I never saw one. And now retired, I like trail riding on my YZ 450 motorcycle. On a ride, my number 2 and I were riding a trail up around 9,500 feet. We're stopping to check out the lake for fishing. After one stop, I couldn't get my bike started, and I was kicking it over and breathing heavy. I would stop and start trying to get the bike running. In the meantime, my son stopped down the trail about 100 feet in front of me, waiting. I did a bonehead thing and had choked the bike instead of leaning it out. Well, I guess it started. And I get us started, I ride past my son about another 50 past him by the lake. When he rode up to me, he asked me if I was huffing loud, and I thought he was talking about me being out of breath, and I said yes. We decided to continue. We both started the bikes at the same time, and then came the scream/roar over both bikes, and with helmets on, it scared us so much we both booked up the trail about a half a mile before we stopped to talk. You know how loud those race bikes are, and we felt the roar. I think he was trying to smell my son, but he never took off his helmet and would smell like exhaust, motor oil, etc. When we got home, I searched for the sound until I found it. It wasn't the low roar, but high-pitched. The match was Washington State News call blasting recording about a young Bigfoot for the news crew. Next day, we, My number one and number two went up armed in a Jeep to see what evidence we could find. We found tracks that showed it was standing right next to my son, sniffing his head. The tracks also had a single foot with a split heel. They were only about size 12 to 13 inches. That's what I wear. We tracked it across the trail to a time fall. There I found in the moss a 19-inch track 2 inches deep, and I couldn't duplicate it. Up the hill in the timber fall was a log with evidence of large animals sitting and eating a deer. Bones were all around the log. They sat on the log eating. In the middle of the tree fall was what I called a deer trap. Logs were placed in such a way that it was easy to get in, but to hop out, it would slow the deer down. Also, right in the middle was sun shining on grass visible from up the hill. The logs were also in a geometric pattern. They were placed there, as I said. As we further worked our way up the hill, I found where they were watching us that morning. Under a bunch of bushes, we could clearly see that they took off in 3 different directions up the hill away. Easy to follow, heavy dew was everywhere, and crushed, trampled foliage. Excuse me. We found further up, aspens snapped at 8 feet to 10 feet up and moved to the open area. Next, there were 2 huge trees stacked on top of each other, roots on opposite ends of each other. I got behind them and they were taller than me. I'm over 6'4". This was easily 8 feet tall and looked like a hunting blind. We left after my son said he heard voices up the hill. These things are intelligent as hell, and they are capable of invisibility. I have a theory on how they do it, and it has to do with the infrasound that some people say they hear. If you want more, we have since then run into these things a lot. Please only use my first name. Okay, Bob? Gotcha, man. I want more. I want to hear more. Send more. Send me all you got or all you're willing to part with. There is myself and many people here want to hear it. That's pretty incredible. I wonder if he took any pictures or videos of that shit. I've seen the 7-foot skinny white creature in the mid-80s, the title of this email. I was driving from Safford to St. John's in Arizona about 3 a.m. The road designation then was 666, but has been changed to 149, I think. Anyway, I was up around Morenci on switchbacks when I saw it step onto the road with its back to me. Initially, I thought it might be some poor soul who needed assistance, and I ordinarily would have stopped to render aid, as it had no clothing on, as I saw in my headlights, except a pair of tidy whities. And I remember seeing clearly the blue and yellow thread on the waistband, which is an odd thing to notice. But as I was scanning the figure for signs of injury, there were none. My instinct began screaming at me over and over, "Don't look in the eyes." I rolled the window of the car down, pulled the little .38 out from underneath the seat I always carried, loaded, cocked it, and shoved it between my knees. I planned to empty all 5 shots into it, if it made me stop by stepping into my lane, and then dump the 5 speed I had down a gear, and floored the accelerator, moving past it before it could turn around or take another step toward my lane, I thought. At 90 miles per hour, praying for a cop, I was still missing about 90 minutes. When I arrived at work late in St. John's, no cop around. It was too tall, too pale, and too skinny to be a human. I've never been able to find out what it was or what really happened, and have been castigated a liar every time I've tried to tell anyone about it. It's always bothered me, and it remains fresh in memory as if it just happened while other memories fade or are covered up. As I read this, I'm shuddering. I switched to a .44 mag right after, and I'm always on the lookout for it, even now. No doubt. I think that description, a lot of people have referred to that as a rake. I don't even know who gets to name something a rake. I haven't a clue why something's been named a rake. I don't know anything about these things called rakes. I don't know. I've seen the photos, the trail camera video photo, and it is kind of frickin' terrifying. No thanks. I'm gonna read one more. Then we're gonna go dive into the bushes. Excuse me. It's titled Helpful Info. Steve, been watching your channel for a few months now and trying to decide if I should share my story and information. The story below will explain why. I grew up in the swamps and woods close to a little town called Folk, Arkansas. If this sounds familiar to the audience, it's probably because this is where they filmed the documentary called The Legend of Boggy Creek. In the early 1970s, my family had many run-ins with these creatures over the years, and my grandfather taught me about how to deal with them, being in our woods when he was teaching me about fishing, running top lines, trapping, etc. I've always loved the outdoors, but knowing these creatures as well as others that aren't naturally occurring keep me on my toes. When I was young, around 5 or so, my mom and grandparents lived next to one another in these woods. We were at the end of a gravel road about a third of a mile from the Sulphur River. My family used me to run stuff back and forth between our two houses even late at night. I don't really remember the exact first time that I knew I was being watched, as I was taking something my mom wanted me to carry to my grandmother. I just always remembered it, and it was something that I would be sensitive to watching out for. We also had some big cats and razorbacks in our woods, but these Bigfoot creatures were different. I had a few encounters in the daytime, but most of them were at night. On most of my nighttime trips, things were fine, but every once in a while I would know that they were there, and I would get that feeling. On those nights, when I would get to my grandparents' house, I'd tell my grandfather, and he would usually have me spend the night with them. But on a few occasions, like if something important needed to be taken back to my mom and my little sister, he would get his gun and go with me. Thank God. My uncle had his .22 rifle bent in half by one of these creatures when he was about 14 years old. So, my grandfather would carry his shotgun when he walked me home on those nights. He always taught me that I should listen to my gut. Everyone in our woods knew that they were there. But because of the craziness that happened when the movie was made, we didn't talk to outsiders about it anymore. The movie people and the people who came around for a while after the movie was released were far worse to us than the creatures. The law enforcement in our area was no help at all, and my grandfather never called on them. We lived so deep in the woods, they really couldn't have gotten to us in a timely manner anyway. And I want to clarify that these creatures are not to be trusted. They'll sometimes take young children and women. We never heard about any of them taking men in our woods, but they would terrorize them sometimes. I'm an older lady now, and I have my own grandkids, and I teach them the things I feel they need to know, just like I did with my kids. And over the years, I've heard many things from across the world, and I've put together a picture that I feel is pretty solid concerning these creatures. I believe that they are definitely connected with the UFO problem, and I do mean problem. I believe that aliens have been using the creatures to do DNA testing and manipulation. I also believe they use humans for this as well. I know that the government knows about everything. They have traded us, humans, for the technology they are getting. I also think the UFO disclosure is going to happen in the near future, and when it does, I hope that you and most of the people who watch this channel won't trust them. They are evil, and I do not believe they are just another race from another planet. To those of you that are going out looking for a connection with the supernatural being, I would warn you to be careful what you wish for. They sometimes pretend to be good, but they cannot be trusted. If you still think these are just a type of animal, then you're only paying attention to the evidence that you want to see, and not everything that is actually happening. Basically, I've never stopped going out and living in the woods, even when I know these creatures are around. If I'm in an area outside my normal home, etc., and I get that feeling, I pray out loud and leave as I'm doing so. When I'm on my property, I don't have any issues because I've prayed over every part of it and asked God's protection. There are some simple rules to follow in doing this, but the legal owner of the property should be the one that does this. I don't go around trying to convince anyone about any of this, but I decided that I would share this with you and this channel in hopes that it'll help some of you. I'm over 50 years old, and this has worked for me anywhere I've ever traveled across the country. The only state I haven't at least visited is Hawaii. Yet. Feel free to reach out if you want more details about the encounters I and family members had when I was growing up. I don't mind sharing them, but I feel like they have mostly been covered by other people that have written into you and shared similar stories. There's one more thing that I will say. I had a trauma as a child. This traumatic experience had nothing to do with the Bigfoot issue, but it was extremely helpful in understanding how traumatic events can cause memory loss, etc. It is very possible for someone who has experienced something they can't process to completely block the memory almost immediately. And then after any amount of time, something else can trigger the person to get a flood of the memory. Trauma can also cause people to act out against others when they're trying to keep their memories suppressed. This might account for some of the instances where people who have been traumatized never speak again or act out against others that try to discuss a sighting. Be kind, be calm and patient with people who are trying to work through traumatic events, and this might help them to share their experiences. I'm sorry this is so long, but I couldn't figure out how to convey at least the basics of what I felt I needed to share any other way. Thank you for helping others with this channel, Steve. I'm so sorry about your loss of your horse. Good news is that we know horses are in heaven because Jesus will be riding on one that flies. I bet Mr. Macaroni will love being able to fly. I know you spend a very large amount of time trying to help others, Steve. Keep up the good fight. I pray that God will help you and keep you and yours safe. Humbled, Lisa, Bert. I don't mind if you use my name. There you go. There you go. Kind words. Wisdom-filled words. Now, lots to think about. There's always lots to think about, especially for me. But I'm now going to switch my focus. I have to. It's time. I got to switch my focus and go down up this road, slip through a big patch of regrowth pine, come out into another clearing and hope that my guess is right where this bull may be hanging out with a couple of cows, and see if we can get this done. Get Sarah's favorite meat in the freezer stacked up in there, and then get back to focusing a lot more on what's going on here with everybody in the world. Share my story, howtohunt.com. Get it to me. I'll be back. Just saw you. Don't move. It's getting scared.